All right, it is 2 minutes past the hour, so we probably should start. Nick, how are you feeling?
Good.
Cool. All right, so again, thank you everyone to joining our Structure.Gantt sessions. This is session number 2, which will be dedicated to more advanced topics. Before we start, we'll go over some general information. So Element Works is now part of the Tempo products. So we are in a big family and we are still working on the same products we have, but in the future, we're looking forward to get some integrations and some new products and new capabilities to provide you more flexibility, will work with the Jira data and some more insights from that data. Next slide, please. Some housekeeping. Your microphones are going to be muted. So if you have any questions, you can submit it into the QA sections in the Zoom box. So we will answer all the questions you have there. Some of those are going to be answered directly in the QA box. Some of those will be answered by Nick. If some of your answers were not answered, we will answer those offline. I will send all the questions you have answered in the follow-up. And this session has been recorded, so you also get the recording after this session is ended with the follow-up later. All right, we have a couple of polls to go through. And this is the first one. So we want to know a little about your Gantt experience. Have you worked with it before? Have you seen it? We'll give it a couple of seconds more. All right, looks like most everyone worked with the Gantt before, and we have lots of Structure.Gantt users who just want to get some new information. That's quite cool. This is what this session is about. Move to the next one. And we also want to know where you deploy it. So are you on-prem or on cloud? All right, couple more seconds. All right, thank you all. We will have the last one in the end. So if you have some couple of seconds in the end, so please stay and I'll answer our last poll. All right, so let's greet everyone. Our today's speakers, Nicholas Ellis, our senior solutions engineer, and this is the guy who answers all your questions regarding the formulas and the complex Gantt use cases. So this is going to be a really, really interesting session.
Thanks, Alex. So hopefully you guys were able to attend our first session last week, talking about the basics and fundamentals. Today we are going to get a lot more into the weeds, a lot more into those very specific use cases. So I'm definitely expecting some interesting questions today. The other thing that I do want to mention is in our last session, we focused primarily on cloud, and that makes things really easy because everything in cloud is in DC, so there's not really much explanation. Today is the opposite. Today we're going to be focusing on the server in DC. It looks like most of the folks we have today are on that deployment, so that's great. For those of you who are on cloud, we will definitely be talking about the differences, but there are going to be some things that we're going to approach today that are only available on the server and DC deployments. The good news is all of those things will come to cloud eventually. It's it's just a matter of time. So we'll also talk about the the timing and expectations with that. So today, basic things that I want to cover are this idea of planning around multiple teams and those teams having different methods. We talked about this a little bit last time, the idea of mixing Agile and Waterfall. It doesn't have to be those two, there's a lot of other different approaches that we can take, and Structure and Gantt want to be as flexible as possible. Then I want to talk about reverse planning. I know that often when we think about Gantt, we're talking about a plan for the future. We're looking forward. We want to, see the steps to get to our goal. But sometimes we have to do the opposite. And there's, a couple different ways that we can do reverse planning. One can be looking back on execution and seeing, what went well and what didn't in order to inform our future plans. And the other way can be, we've got this really important milestone that we need to reach by this date. Can we get all of this work done, before then? Is this like a reasonable sort of way to plan? So we'll talk about those. And then we'll get really deep into the DC features, resource balancing when we've got a lot of resources that are overloaded, getting into that what if scenario planning without actually making changes. And then definitely my favorite, formulas, effectors, and attributes. So there's a lot of really cool things that we can do with that. And no worries if you've never heard of any of those things, formulas, effectors, and attributes. I will explain all of those in great detail. So first, let's talk about how we can plan with multiple different teams. So ultimately, when we have multiple different teams or different groups that need to be treated differently, we're going to be using slices. So a slice is a way to customize our configuration for a subset of issues. And this is basically what the slice menu looks like. I just want to explain kind of what the different parts are. Number one is name, and this is an editable text section. So when you first create it, it's going to say new slice. I would highly recommend that you use anything other than the words new slice as the name of your slice. And that's a really great place to start. We just want to give things names. 2 and 3, we're probably not going to be deactivating or deleting things, especially to start, but just good to know what these are. Sometimes we do want to make a slice inactive because we don't want to delete it. We might want to use it later, but maybe it's messing with something and we need to turn it off. Number 4 is the config section. So this is going to be what part of the configuration do we want to change. Here I only have one section, that's appearance. And you can see number 7 here is delete that section. I need to have one section. If I don't have any sections, what I'm doing is basically defining some issues and then not doing anything with them. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I can also have as many sections as I want. So if I want to change estimates, the way we link, the color that the item is on the board, and the fields that we use for manual scheduling. I mean, we can change a whole lot of stuff all at once. So, there's a lot of power here. Number 5 is the filter type. The default is going to open up to issue types, because often we'll see like, I want epics treated like this, and I want stories treated like this, and I want bugs treated like this. So really simple things like that. Obviously, we can do the same with JQL. We can say type equals epic or type equals story. So I definitely prefer JQL just because there's a lot more functionality there. Even if you're only doing something as simple as type equals epic, it's nice to do it in JQL because later you can add something like and status equal or and fixed version equals or whatever other things. So this is just going to give you the most flexibility. And of course, we have that little check mark there that's going to double check your JQL and make sure that everything's good. I already talked about number 7, that delete section. And then number 8 is kind of a hidden one here. Maybe it's not obvious what number 8 is pointing to. But on the left side here, next to all these little slices of pie, there are 8 dots, and they will appear when you cursor over them. And those are how we reorder the slices. The order of slices is really, really important. We can see I've got a couple slices here. This top one is project equals Mars. And we can guess that this purple epics one down here is going to make my epics purple. Now, naturally, if I have an epic in the Mars project, it's going to show up as orange because it's going to match this top slice. It's never going to look at any of these slices underneath. So it's always going to be the top matching one, and then everything else is going to be ignored. So make sure that those things are in the correct order. So naturally, this is a really simple example, but we will get into a lot more complexity. There's a lot of different things that we can mess with here with slices. The other thing that's going to be really, really helpful with dealing with multiple teams is folders. Now, in a perfect world, we would be able to do something like insert all of our work and then group it by, team or fixed version or something in kind of a dynamic way. So, based on the fields of the issue or maybe even grouping by project. But sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes that doesn't make sense because, these two different groups are just working in totally different ways. They have a totally different hierarchy. There's not a way to unify them into, one structure easily. And folders are going to allow us to do that. So we can create two folders, and in those two different folders, we can insert a very different set of issues with a very different hierarchy to represent our very different teams. I should warn you that folders work best when they're added to the structure before anything else. Adding folders to an existing structure can definitely run into some interesting behavior. It's maybe hard to explain all the different edge cases there, but just if you put folders in first and then add other things, you're just going to have a much, much nicer time. We can think of folders as substructures. So, ultimately, when you open a blank structure, we can think of that as one kind of folder. And then if we add folders, we can think of those as, they have their own collection of generators, they have their own collection of, rules and relationships that they're representing. And those automation generators can even be inserting other structures. That's something that I really, really like. So if we've got 5 different teams working in 5 different ways, they've all got their own totally different structures. I don't even need to understand how they're building those structures and what they're doing there. I can create a 5-folder structure and just insert their structures and just kind of grab them. So whatever they're doing, I can just kind of, plagiarize or reuse the work that they've already done. And this gives the team autonomy to define how that work is organized and what works for them. And then you can use that in your kind of roll-up view. Then, of course, those folders can be represented on the Gantt. The default is going to be groups. So we're going to assume that the folder is a grouping of work. That's generally how we think of folders. But they definitely can be milestones if we want to represent them that way. So there's a lot of flexibility around this. So this is our multi-team example. We actually used this image on the last presentation, this idea of mixing waterfall and agile. So we've got our epics up top. This is our high level plan. We can see that our epics are made purple over here. There's definitely a slice going on there. And we're using our folder as a grouping. So we can see this folder starts at the beginning of our earliest epic and ends at our latest epic right there. And then items in here are scheduled automatically. So they don't have these vertical lines. We can see these ones with the sprint scheduling have vertical lines on both sides telling us the start date and the end date are scheduled. Our sprints are doing kind of the opposite. That's more of a short-term plan. We've got a slice for green stories and a slice for red bugs. So we can identify, which is which at a glance there. And then these guys are scheduled by sprint. So they're manual. So they've got those vertical lines and they're considered fixed duration. So I would think of these as, slightly more dissimilar plans, but it really doesn't matter if we've got 2 teams that are both doing Scrum, but maybe they use different fields for estimation, or they use different this or that, or maybe their sprints don't line up. Maybe one of them is 2 weeks starting this week, and one of them is 2 weeks starting next week. All of those things can be hiccups if we're trying to unify it all into one place, but we can set those, configurations up to respect them. So if they're very, very slightly different or extremely different, we're probably going to use slices to define that level of differentiation. So here I'm getting into this idea of reverse planning. So I've got my milestone up here, and for those Americans, this is the European date format. So we're saying end of the year, 31st of December. and I want to get all of this work done by that time. So I've set this up. I've given this a hard date, and it's being blocked by some of these epics. We can see here that I've got this red box showing me the critical path. And interestingly enough, this one is not part of the critical path here, and that's because it's manually, that's because it's manually scheduled. So it's if we move it over to the edge here, it will become part of the critical path. But again, that idea of the critical path is if we delay any of these items, we delay the whole end of the project. And if I delay this item, if I move this one over to the right, this one's not going to move because it's manually scheduled. It's stuck in place there. And looking at our resource calculation at the bottom, we can see these two items are overlapping, and it looks like Team Gemini is going to be overloaded for a couple of weeks here. You can't see the dates here, but these are quarters, these big boxes. So this is probably 2 months or so that the team is going to be overloaded. So it looks like, this milestone is not going to be achievable. Now, of course, there's different things that we could do. From the Gantt side of things, we might increase capacity, which, will make these red boxes disappear, but doesn't really solve any of our problems, unless we can do something corresponding in the real world and, add additional resources to try to pick up that slack. Of course, the other way that we could do this is if we could reduce or limit scope. So maybe this last epic, being the biggest one, has some scope creep or has some things that can be limited out. And as we remove those things, then we can start to say, all right, now it looks like, we're going to be able to achieve this milestone, if we can cut out these particular pieces of work. But in general, we're going to create a milestone or, something to schedule manually. And then we can link other items to that. And as we start to move our plan around, we can basically see if this makes sense. The other thing worth noting is, this red hat here is telling me that this epic has got a scheduling error. And of course, that's this link here that's not being respected. If I did respect this link, it would start right here at the edge where this one ends. And then we would just move the error up here to the milestone, and it would get its own little red hat there showing that it has a scheduling problem. We can often understand what's going on by that. And then this is actually available as an attribute. It's probably one of my favorite Gantt attributes to use. We can just say, give me the Gantt scheduling error field. And 90% of the time, we expect that field to be empty, saying there's no error, things are fine. But when we do see, there is a Gantt scheduling error, we know there's going to be a red hat. We know that there's going to be some sort of error. And we can use that information into a formula column. So even if the Gantt isn't open, even if we're just looking at the structure board, we can say, hey, Gantt thinks there's a problem here. Gantt thinks that this, isn't going to work. So we can look for those scheduling and resources conflicts, and then kind of fine tune the plan to make it work. So all the things that we've been talking about up until this point have all been relevant and possible on cloud. So from this point on, I am going to try to point out things that we can't do in cloud when those things are coming to cloud. I would highly recommend you check out our cloud roadmap. So if you go to the wiki, it's going to be right on the main page there as one of the kind of quick links. This is updated regularly. We always want to try to be as transparent as possible with how we're delivering features. These are the two next big features that are coming to cloud. So the Gantt attributes. So actually, I did mention that this error field was an attribute. So that is the counterexample of something I mentioned that's not available on cloud. But they're going to be coming really, really soon. So there's a lot of cool things that we can do there. And of course, formulas are already available in cloud. So that means once attributes are available, we'll be able to use those in formulas. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that we can do there. And then resource leveling. So resource leveling is an automated way of dealing with those over allocations on the chart. That will be coming later this year. I'm very hesitant to give a specific date. I'm sure you all know the challenges of trying to predict software in and of itself, but also in particular, resource leveling is a very complex algorithm. There's a lot of different edge cases that need to be taken into consideration. And especially if you've got a chart with 100 plus resources and 10,000 plus issues, there's a lot of complexity to digest and understand there. So yeah, that's definitely coming, but we'll see when it gets here. So now we're going to talk about the on-prem DC server versions and what we can do over there. So as I mentioned before, we do have this idea of feature parity. Naturally, as I mentioned, some things are not available in either Structure Cloud or Gantt Cloud. But I am going to try to mention those limitations, but you don't really need to worry about it too much because the goal is for these products to be interchangeable. We want everything that's available on-prem to be available on cloud. That's definitely the goal. Of course, in a perfect world, that would be perfect feature parity. In the case that they can't be perfect feature parity, there will at least be use case parity. So, maybe we can't exactly do the same thing. The button doesn't work exactly the same way, but it solves the same problem. I probably a broken record at this time, but yeah, all these things are planned for clouds. They will be there eventually. Yeah, let's hop out of here and let's actually build some Gantt charts. Although I do see some questions, Alex. Are there any quick questions I can maybe try to answer before we get into the demo?
Yeah, there's actually one that you can answer right at the beginning. What condition would make a red box around a task? Is there a way to see condition it is calling out?
So like we're talking about like this, like how do we make this box red?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So naturally, it is going to be a slice like we were talking about previously, but I guess that'll probably be our first example. So we can just jump in here, and I've got 3 different teams working in 3 different ways, and they're each in their own folders. So I've called this structure multi-team folders. I've got 3 different folders, and each folder is inserting its own structure. So I've got building a house structure. I've got my structure team project structure, and I've got my extension team. So I've got an extension theme that breaks down into a hierarchy of issues underneath. And if I expand all, I should be able to find some. I don't have any bugs in this board. So yeah, let's add a bug.
There's actually, Nick, I will stop you for a second. The person who asked the question did clarify it a little bit. So probably the question was about the critical path. That red rectangle around
that red
taskbar.
box. So yeah, there are multiple red boxes. So we've got the critical path enabled here. So I should see some items with some red boxes. Although I am current. Okay, so this item right here is part of the critical path. It's got the red box on it. And because it's only one item, we can safely assume that this is the end of the chart. This is the rightmost edge of the chart as it currently stands. The idea of the critical path, which by the way, we can turn on and off here if I want to remove that, is if we delay anything in this chain, we delay the whole end of the project. So when I link this, I've created now 3 items that are all in the critical path. And here, as we can see, if any of these get delayed or if anything else gets linked to them, they immediately become part of the critical path. And we can see if I stretch an item, like I add to the scope, delaying this item's going to delay these items and push them further out. Yeah, I mean, it's just the rightmost item in the chart, and anything directly linked to it, we should always expect to be part of the critical path. Yeah, I think that's it. I hope that makes sense. So now we can see our team core is finishing in the beginning of 2024. So we've got pretty long-term path here. We can see that, my folder here, which is a grouping of my team. This is not a generically added folder. This is something added by a generator. And we can see that this is grouping the work here, and then the structure deliver grouping on top is the same size. And it looks like this item is the only one here at the left. So if I snap this, now I change the size of this grouping dramatically, and we can see team core doesn't really start until 2023. They don't have any work scheduled for the next year, according to this current board. But we can see that these two different groups underneath, team deliver and team core, are basically rolling up to this higher level grouping at the top. But it'll probably be helpful to take a look at the configuration. If we do click on an individual item, we can see, I do have slices set up. So I've got my extension slices here inside, this extensions folder. But if I close that, we can see that these guys also have, my building a house actually is the one without a slice because it's using the default configuration. And then my structure one has this str team slice as well. So we can open up our configuration. You can see that I'm using my team management configuration, which, if I collapse my structure again, I've got my multi-teams that I'm trying to understand here. And my default configuration, we can see, is making these items blue. So that's what's going on here. The house team doesn't have a slice to make it blue. It's just using the default configuration. And then the structure team has a slice to make it purple, and also to use different fields for scheduling. So my structure team is using target start and target end. My Gantt team is using start date and due date. And my house team is using a totally different set. Oh, sorry, they are also using start date and due date, but they could be using a totally different set of fields. So we've got a lot of flexibility here. And of course, we can, here I'm just doing manual scheduling and coloring, and then the same over here, manual scheduling and coloring, but we can add a lot of different sections. We can change the way that we're doing work estimates. So if we don't want to use story points, or maybe, to the Gantt team, a story point is half a day, and maybe to the structure team, they're fine with a story point being 8 hours being the full day. So we can even have people using the same fields differently, which can definitely be true. Maybe we have 5 teams using story points, but story point doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to each team. You're definitely going to see slight variations in things like that. And then, of course, even though my resources are teams, you can see I've got a lot of names down here because I've also got my extensions team using assignees. So they're assigning work differently. So my extensions team is actually got their work assigned to individuals, while the structure team and the Gantt team have their work assigned to teams. So, and then of course you see we do have teams at the bottom here. So, so a lot of mixing and matching, a lot of different things kind of working in tandem here. Let's take a look at our next example. I also wanted to talk about this idea of reverse planning. So instead of using milestones, we can also do this with fixed version. So, so in my reverse planning, I'm using this banking version app, and it's a little bit silly that 1.1 is up here and 1.0 is down here. So we can just pretend this is a upward staircase instead of a downward staircase, but this same idea. And we can see 1.0 here, and this is my 1.0. So we can see that the 1.0 grouping actually extends beyond the release date of 1.0. So 1.0 is supposed to be released at the end of next month. We can think of this as the end of June, even though it's technically the 1st of July. And we've got an item, and it looks like this item assigned to Darth Vader, which is over that line. So this item is scheduled a little bit too late. So there's a lot of really cool ways that we can deal with this. Naturally, I tend to lean on formulas. And what I've done here is I've created a formula to answer that question. So I'm grabbing my release date. On fixed versions, you can have multiple. So I have to map them. I have to look at them all. I happen to know that these guys all only have one fixed version. So I'm not dealing with the case where I have multiple fixed versions, just to keep things nice and simple. And then I can just say, if the Gantt finish date is after the fixed version release date, then show me the days between. So show me how many days over. So maybe actually, instead of out of fixed version, I could call this days over fixed version. So this is how many days past the end. And of course, we can see that I've got this one item here that extends 6 days past the end. So it looks like this is ending on the 7th of July, 6 days after July 1st, which is the release date. And when we get really clever, we can even roll that up. So I've created this formula, and then I've summed over sub items. So I'm rolling it up, and I can see that here at the banking app version, we're 6 days over. And of course, if we grab something and move it over, we can add to that number. So now this one is also going to show up as 10 days over. And now we can see we've got 16 days of work that is scheduled outside of our fixed version. And this becomes really nice because we don't even need to look at the Gantt chart. We can totally collapse this, and we can still see this information. The one thing I do want to warn you about is, in general, when using formulas, they do a really good job of guessing. So I type fixed version, and it knows what I'm talking about. The one thing that it doesn't pick up are these Gantt attributes. So if I call this out and I say something like, give me that Gantt scheduling error field that we talked about before, so that way I can see, where Gantt scheduling errors are. And it says, I have no idea what Gantt scheduling error is. I don't know what you're talking about. So I can just click this, type Gantt. You can see I have a lot of Gantt fields. So there's a lot of information that we can pull here. But scheduling error is the one that I'm looking for. And it looks like I've actually already got that in a column. So it kind of did that quickly. And now we can see, 90% of the time, this is just returning nothing, but we are showing an error in one case. And then of course, we can just do something like this. If the error exists, some problem exists. So 90% of the time it's going to be blank. And of course, blank is not true, but any sort of string, any value in here is going to be true. So now I just, if I see an error, I'm going to say some problem exists, and I'm going to do my quotes right this time, so it actually makes sense. And now we can see, I'm just returning that string. Of course, we could do something like returning wiki markup to make it all pretty. I don't know that I want to spend a ton of time writing out a complex wiki markup here, but I'll just do something simple and just make it bold. There's a lot of different pieces of information that we can extract from the Gantt chart and then kind of use in formulas in interesting ways. Getting back to my actual Gantt view. Oh, I didn't want that. The other thing is we can look at the resources here, and we can see that I've got some over allocations. So I've got some resources that are overloaded. It looks like Darth Vader is having a rough week at the beginning of July here. So he's a little bit over allocated. And this is where we would use leveling algorithm, the resource leveling. So it's got these two little boxes and an arrow, and that's exactly what it does. It moves items into the future. Now, naturally, if we've got two items stacked on top of each other, one of them is going to stay in place, one of them is going to be moved into the future. And we need a way of deciding, this one's more important. It really needs to be done first. This one's less important. It can be delayed. And we do that with the resource leveling priority. So what I've got here is I'm storing it in the Gantt chart. I'm basically not using a field for this. So I'm just going to let Gantt decide which items are more important and which items are less important. As I mentioned, the leveling algorithm is really, really complex. So I don't really want to get into explaining exactly the decision that it's making there. But the short version is it's going to try to put bigger tasks at the beginning, because ideally, if we have all of our big tasks done first, we should have a little bit more flexibility when moving around those smaller estimated tasks. So there's a lot more that goes into it than that, but that's kind of the short version. We can use anything here, so maybe priority, or not priority, but rank is by far the most common, so I would definitely encourage you to use rank. Ideally, our backlog is already sorted by rank, so we've got higher ranked items at the top and lower ranked items at the bottom. And this means that when we level, things are always going to respect that ranking priority. The other thing that's important is if we created some sort of formula or used some other type of attribute, maybe priority, maybe due date, maybe some other field, that's perfectly valid. But the interesting thing is we can run into ties. We can run into two items that have the same score, two items that have the same due date, two items that have the same whatever field that we're using to determine leveling priority. So rank is never going to run into that. Rank is always going to be deterministic and have a unique value for every single item. So we never run into that tiebreaker case. And I do actually want to save this. So cancel, and we'll save. So now we're using rank. And in general, before we ever run leveling, I would always create a baseline. So I believe we talked about baselines last time, but it's just a snapshot of the chart. So I'm taking this Gantt baseline. Jira-based baselines are based on fields. So 99% of the time, we're going to want to use a Gantt baseline to use the current chart. If we have extra fields like planned start versus actual start, then there's a use case there. But I think for the most part, we'll be using the Gantt baseline. And now, of course, this baseline is exactly what the items look like now. So we can't really see, or maybe you can see this little white underline on some of these items. But now I run leveling. I'll resolve from the project start, which is right under the screen here. And it looks like Darth Vader is my only guy who's over allocated. Han Solo is over allocated, but this is in the past. This orange day is today, while this green line is the start day. So this is a plan a couple weeks in the future that we plan to start. These items in the past, I'm not worried about them. I'm not concerned with them with leveling. We can clear existing leveling delays. So if there was a leveling run before, we can ignore it. And then we can choose what to include. So maybe items that are manually scheduled, we don't want to move around. Maybe items that are already started or completed shouldn't be moved. But naturally, this is all demo data, so we can be pretty aggressive here. We'll just level everything. And okay, so we did level the chart, and it looks like there are still some over allocations, although not on Darth Vader. So that was kind of an interesting method. So here we can see we've got the critical path. This is our rightmost item in the chart. And if we look at, and I broke my formula. So let's unbreak my formula here, because now I've got an interesting case where it is over the end of the fixed version. I'm going to have to define Gantt finish date, because formulas, Gantt finish date. Oh, come on. There we go. And now we can see that I've got an item one day over the end, and it is this item assigned to Darth Vader. So it looks like my leveling did work. It did remove all of my over allocations, but I had a little bit too much scheduled for this version. So maybe I want to delay this and say we'll get this done the second week of August instead of the first week of August. Maybe we can get Vader some help, some additional resources to try to really push this item through and get it done a little bit sooner. There's a lot of different ways that we can deal with this scenario. But the number one thing is seeing it, being able to understand, that there's a problem. We can't, fix these problems if we don't have visibility on their existence. So I've got one last example that I wanted to touch on here. This is, again, getting into that reverse plan, or I guess it's not quite reverse planning, but it could be. So here I've got the same idea, but instead I'm using milestones. So these milestones are basically their predicted end dates. And this is a pretty uninteresting Gantt chart here. All we can see is these 3 milestones. And that's just because I have 3 items on the top level. As soon as I start opening this up, we can see I've got a lot of subsections. We can actually look at some of these like individual teams works. And it looks like Team Core has quite a bit of stuff going on. They've got some subtasks. It looks like these items are getting the default estimates. They're kind of scattered around here, but there's a couple things going on. So let's look at our configuration here. So I'm treating my milestones as themes. And again, I've got the default issue types here. This is exactly the same as, doing something like this, saying type equals theme. This is definitely the preferred way. And then that item behavior is going to be milestones. So we can treat items as a group. Task we can think of as a normal box on the chart, and milestone are the diamonds. And then of course we can hide items. So we can say, we don't want to show that. The way that my structure is built here is I'm inserting my themes, and then I'm linking them by their implements link to these initiatives. So there's an implements link from core products to structure, and there's an implements link from this structure initiative to this epic. And then what I do is I say, use that same implements link as a finish to finish. So when I finish my epic, I also finish my initiative. And when I finish all my initiatives, I also finish my theme. So all of my work rolls up. The building blocks of my structure and the links that I'm using over there are also the relationships that I'm representing on my Gantt chart. And we can see, I don't know why my dictionary is trying to pop up there. It's got that link, and we can see this is a, oh no, I opened up the, there. So we can see I've got multiple finish to finish relationships to my 3 different initiatives here. So when all of those initiatives are done, this epic will be completed. And, or sorry, this theme will be completed. And of course, I can drag this and give it a date. I can say, I want to schedule you at a particular time. It's not letting me do that because of my configuration. So let's just quickly mess with that. So I'm going to cheat here, and I'm going to say use resolution date for manual scheduling. And yep, and now this one is done. And so it gets that resolution date. And if I do the same over here, I can mark this as done, and then it's going to say it's done today. So I basically set that. Yep. So this is my today line. It was resolved right now today. So it's now using that date. And we can see, it's got an error. It does not think that we can get this work done by that time. So then, of course, I can start going in here, trying to move things around, trying to change estimates, trying to fine tune this plan to see if this is achievable, or if, maybe we need to move this milestone, maybe we need to, reduce some scope. The other thing that we can do, of course, is, we can just leave them as they're auto-scheduled, and then we can see things move around. So if I open up my extensions and start to, change some estimates, I say, oh, this one's actually going to take a little bit longer, and it's going to push that out. So we can see, our milestone dynamically moving based on the amount of work. Or of course, if we, manually schedule it and I did the same thing, it would just get that little red hat saying that there is a scheduling error. So, we can choose to be very, very rigid. This is the plan, show some errors when things disagree with the plan, or we can be really flexible, let things be auto-scheduled, see how things move as work changes, and maybe compare that to a baseline to see how we're doing. But yeah, I think that's most of what I wanted to show. I think the one thing that I did mention, but I did not get into too much depth on, is effectors. There are some really, really cool things that we can do with effectors, although that might be its own kind of hour-long talk, because there's a lot of complexity there. But in short, we can do something, and I guess I'll try to do a really, really short version right here. So I can, inherit dates, and I can say, if my type is story, then I, want to return my parents' due date. And so, we'll get a really simple formula here. And now, and of course, I don't think I have a due date on my epic. So as this one, I'll set a due date, for some date. And now this date is going to be inherited by my formula. I want to change that output to be date time, so that way these are readable. And of course, this is the same date, even though it's formatted slightly differently. And then what we can do is we can add an effector to copy this. So I can add an effector here, attribute to issue field, and of course this is going to fail. We need to add it at the top. So I'll start this over one more time. And I can inherit dates as my formula. I will set it to due date because I'm actually going to use that as the due date. And I'm going to say that I'm only going to do this for, actually, I don't need to say type equals story because I'm only returning the value on type equals story. And then when I run, it's going to say, there are a couple of items. Oh, a couple of them are empty and a couple of them are changing to a specific date. So I'll say I actually only want to change these two because I'm moving them to a specific date. And now I've basically scheduled these items on the Gantt. So, we can pull information from the Gantt, we can pull information from the structure board, and then using effectors, we can pipe that information into Jira and then start the whole cycle over again as we update those dates, things move on the Gantt, and then we kind of update our things in here. And we can get into a lot of complexity when we start doing things like, and there's not a Gantt scheduling error. So we're only going to do this if there isn't a problem. If we see a Gantt scheduling error, then we're going to not write this date. So we can take a lot of information from the Gantt and then use that to write information to Jira, and move things on the Gantt. So a lot of cool complexity there, but I'm realizing we're running up on the clock here. I've barely left 12 minutes here for questions. So yeah, what have we got, Alex?
We do have a couple. So can we level based on Epic's priority?
Yeah, we should be able to. So you're saying, you want to use priority as the way that we're leveling items. There's a distinction here. So what we can't do is this. I can't say priority. I started typing that earlier and then I was like, wait, no, you can't do that. What I can do is a formula. So if I, write a formula, I can use priority, and I would do something like this where I say a case statement based on priority. And then, if the priority is high, I'm going to give it a score of 10. And if the priority is low, I'm going to give it a score of 5 or something. Because basically the leveling priority needs a numerical value so it can compare and contrast. It's not smart enough to know the difference between high, medium, critical, things like that. So as soon as we translate this into an actual number, then it makes sense, and then this is going to be usable. But yeah, a little bit of legwork, but yes, you can use priority or some combination of other fields pretty easily as the leveling priority.
This is a really cool answer, and we have some addition to the question because originally it was asked about
the
original question was about the rank actually. So can we level based on Epic's rank?
Oh, sorry, did I get it wrong? So you meant Epic rank?
Oh, no, you did absolutely right. That was the first question, but can we also show about leveling on the ranks instead of priority?
Oh, well, I mean, that's what I did before. What I did before was leveling based on rank. So I set my leveling priority to rank, and then now when I run leveling, it's doing it based on rank. So that's what I did last time.
Cool. Can we use fixed versions as milestones?
I don't believe so. I think that would be a great use case. I'd actually really like to see that happen. But these are essentially groupings on the chart. So you can see, I've got this group by fixed version, and I create this group over here. And I don't have the milestone button here. I cannot turn this into a milestone. And then, of course, JQL is not going to be relevant here because this is not an issue. So I can't have a slice say treat this like a milestone. But yeah, I would love to submit that as a feature request because I think that would be a really cool way to do things, is to say, the release date is the end or the date that this milestone is using on the chart or something like that.
All right, the next one, can you get a sum of time tracking or remaining estimates from technical tasks to roll up to stories without a formula?
So, I mean, here I'm summing up remaining estimate. You can see it's blank most of the time. Maybe I can find a more interesting structure. But yeah, so here I've got my remaining estimate and I'm rolling it up. So sorry, can you clarify it one more time? So we're rolling it
So,
up
so
without
I
using
guess,
formulas?
I guess this is the stories split into the technical tasks and can roll up those estimation on the story levels from the technical task. So maybe we can use subtask as the substitution for the technical tasks.
Yeah, I mean, if we were doing something like that, if we basically only have remaining estimate on, the stories here, and I'll put a value in here, and then hypothetically, if we didn't have values on our epics, then yeah, I mean that's how it would be working. Like we would just be rolling up. Oh, and I think and I can't have a zero remaining estimate. Oh, it doesn't like that zero remaining estimate. So yeah, if we only have values on the stories and we're rolling up, we're only rolling up those story values. But if we have values at the story and the epic level and the initiative level, then we're just also rolling up all those. So I think we would want to use a formula. The nice news is that's like a really simple formula. So it's like roll up stories only, and we would just do this. It's sum if type equals story, which I will spell correctly, then I want to return remaining estimate. And so, this is only going to sum up the remaining estimate on the stories, which I almost spelled correctly. So, I mean, this is a very, very brief one-line formula that hopefully makes sense.
All right. Can we get a sum of time logged based on temp account or temp account category? For example, time logged to billable hours in Tempa only.
Yeah, so we do, this account field is actually from Tempo accounts. It looks like this board doesn't have any. I don't know that any of my examples here have the Tempo account set up. But if they did, this field does work here. And then, we can group by it. So if I group by that Tempo account field, that's of course going to be valid. And now, and of course, it's grouping up by no account because there's no account here. But yeah, and then if I wanted to, we could roll up, work logged. And then we could be even more specific. We could say, in a particular time period or by a particular user. I have to admit, as we've only been part of Tempo for about 6 months here, I'm a little bit less than a complete expert on that. But yeah, I would expect that to work. But please, reach out to the solutions team or the support team if you have trouble with that.
All right, cool. Can you use sprints instead of dates at the top of the timeline?
Yes and no. So here I've got, actually, I'm just gonna find a totally different structure here because I have what is it called? I have a structure that's based on sprints. I just can't actually find it right now. Sprint management, of course. So yeah, so here I've got a one using sprints, and I've still got the dates at the top, but when I grab an item, you can see I do show the sprints. So there's not a way of showing the sprints all the time. But when we need to, when we're trying to move things from one sprint to another, we will show them. The reason why it's difficult is because we can have an unlimited number of projects in the board. So if we've got 20 projects with 20 different, sprint durations and settings and things like that, that would be a ton of noise to try to put on the board all at once. So, this way we're only looking at the relevant sprints. So that way, if I did have another project down here and I was grabbing a different, rather than the banking app sprint, but like another team's sprint, I would show the relevant sprints there. But yeah, we can show them on the timeline, but not all the time.
All right, so this is an interesting one. What about using a specific issue type's due date as a milestone? For example, initiatives and children have values, but only the initiative date is the milestone.
So yeah, let me go back to my portfolio overview. So what we want to do is, so I would probably do that with a formula, and what we could do there, and actually I wouldn't create it as a formula over here. I would create it on this side. I think I actually already have a slice. So yeah, my themes are going to be milestones, and then I could say something like initiatives, have special dates. And then I would say, I'll use JQL to do it the right way and say type equals initiative. And then I could add a section saying manual scheduling. And yeah, I would do two things. So I would say item behavior is going to be milestone. So I want this to be a milestone. And then I would say it's going to use the milestone date of a formula. And that formula would roll up those values from underneath. And we could even have a formula that checks and say, oh, well, only 5 out of 6 of these have dates. We need to make sure all 6 have dates. And then once everything has a date, then we'll use that as the date for the initiative. So that's why I would do that. There's probably some other ways of accomplishing it, but that's kind of the first approach that comes to mind.
All right. Let me see what we have also here. So there's a good one over here. What could be the reason that after resource leveling, there are still resources overloaded?
That is a great question. So there are certain things that the leveling algorithm cannot solve. So if we go to sprint management here, we can see that that this one has an error. That's because of a link. I actually don't have any over allocations here, but it's easy enough to cause one. So this is 12 story points, and it is 1 week and 1 day's worth of work. So of course, 6 days worth of work over a 10-day period makes sense. If I change this to like 121, some absurdly high value, now my team is overloaded. And I can do all the leveling I want. I can move different items all over this chart, but this one item in and of itself is an overallocation. So moving all the items around it, moving this item to a different sprint, all of those things are going to have no effect. So we can have a case where one item is an overallocation, and in that case, the leveling doesn't do anything. And then, of course, if we choose to not include things like manually scheduled items, we can have 2 items that are manually scheduled on top of each other. And then, Gantt is just going to, or the leveling algorithm more specifically, is going to skip those items. So it's not going to touch them. So that's another case where we can have an overallocation. There are also some possibilities. They're less common, but we could have a situation where maybe leveling wasn't possible, either because of some very complex linking or a situation where there wasn't a right answer where moving items on the chart resolved all the leveling. But in general, I find the resource leveling does a pretty good job. But yeah, I mean, it's not perfect. There's always going to be certain things that it's not quite clever enough to handle.
All right, thank you, Nick. We're on the brink of the hour, so probably that's going to be our last question answered online. So if you have your questions submitted and we haven't answered yet, so we will answer all the questions, and we'll send in the follow-up letter with the recording.
Yeah.
Well, right. Before we go, we have our last poll that we'd like to go through. So it would be great if you have some couple of seconds to answer that. But otherwise, thank you all for attending our today's session. We will have the third one in a week's time, which is called Expert Hour, where we are going to answer all the questions that you can submit in advance, and we will add the link to submit the question into the follow-up letter. So if you have any questions on how the Gantt operates or specific use cases you want we to go through, please submit those or just ask during that next session, we'll be glad to answer it and help you with the use cases.
Yeah, thanks everyone so much for joining today. Yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys at the next session, and yeah, looking forward to all the exciting questions that I'm sure are going to come in.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day.